Congratulations, everybody, especially the new people. You know, every man in this room has been a newcomer. So we know where you're coming from, and we all encourage you to keep coming back. My name is Michael. I'm alcoholic.
Michael!
Thank you for asking me
You're welcome.
4 weeks ago.
Postpone.
You postponed to pitch here. Yeah, you know, when I came into AA, I was a basket case. I had no living skills from before I began to drink, while I drank, up to the moment I came into AA. So AA got me physically sober, and by coming back, I've learned the living skills to cope with life out there, so I don't feel the need to go back to drinking and using like I did. And that's the miracle of AA, is that it begins with physical sobriety, and we progress if we keep coming back to learning how to become happy, productive people out there in the world. I grew up in what looked like a normal home, but it was anything but. Both my parents were children of alcoholics. My dad was an alcoholic. And after about 2 or 3 years of age, they really showed no interest in parenting whatsoever. You know, I was raised on a TV. I never knew how to communicate with my parents. They didn't really care. My family was a very attractive family. My dad looked like Lloyd Bridges, my mom looked like Doris Day, my brother looked like the Beaver, and I looked like E.T. I had this head that wouldn't quit, you know, just gigantic head. And I was teased from the time I began to go to school, you know, big head, fat head. Head was usually what they called me. And I developed a big inferiority complex over that, and the feelings of not belonging started then, and the feeling of wanting to get revenge. Revenge is a big factor in my whole life, you know. I didn't resent people really, I hated them. And when I hated them, I found ways to punish them for what they thought about me and did to me. The only thing I really had was my horses. I grew up in an area about an hour west of here. It was a fairly affluent area. My parents were not affluent at all. My dad sold used cars on Van Nuys Boulevard. There's nothing wrong with selling used cars. We lived way over our heads. And that made me feel lesser than all the time. All my kids in school, you know, they had movie star parents and, you know, lots of money, and we didn't. But it was important to my mom that we be with that group of people. So I learned early on, you know, that the appearances are really important, you know, at the expense of everything, at the expense of being genuine, expense of just being who you are. Of course, we didn't believe in God, my family, my mother in particular. You know, God is for weaklings. We don't do weak in this family. Whatever we do on our own. And so that's kind of the mentality I had growing up. I was a good student. That's one way I buried myself. In around 5th grade, they told me I had a photographic memory, which further set me apart from everybody because, you know, even though I felt like a piece of crap, it allowed me to feel superior. So I vacillated between feeling superior and feeling absolutely less than anybody. My dad would come home drunk and tell me all the time, you know, that I was the only reason he stayed in the family. And that put a lot of pressure on me as a kid. My mother, over and over again, told me her sad story, you know, of her dad being an alcoholic and hiding the booze and the IV and her finding it, etc. So I grew up with 2 very needy parents who relied on me to tell their story to. Around 11 or 12 years old, my folks had a business partner, and he began molesting me every week. Every week he would come to our little ranch, and walk into my bedroom and give me a head and, don't tell anybody. And because I didn't have a close relationship with my parents, I didn't know how to cope with it. Whenever we were running low on money, my dad would say, "Oh, we'll sell the farm and sell the horses," and that selling the horses to me was like the guillotine. I lived for my horses. I lived for my animals. They were the only ones I could go out and be myself with. Every time after I was molested, I'd go out in the paddock and hold on to my favorite one and just cry and, just emote. Around that time, he began thinking suicidally every night and during the day. I thought, I really just don't belong here. I look odd, I just don't fit in, and all these things happening in my life, I just felt just too dirty to be here. Hadn't picked up a drink yet, but I sure needed one. Around 15, 16, my dad called in and told us that he was not coming home anymore, that he had another family that he had been keeping in the valley with 2 kids. And he left, and the ranch went, and the horses all went to his new kids. And that was extremely painful for me because these animals were personal. They were, closer than my family was. So I had a ton of resentments against this guy. Hatred is a better word. I wanted to punish him as badly as I could, so I had a lawyer change my last name legally to my mother's maiden name, which was Power. So I was now Michael Power. And that last name was not lost on me because that is the one thing that I always wanted, was power. So I kind of lucked into the name that I wanted to be a part of. However, it didn't work. Nothing was getting me power. My last year in high school, I was getting all A's except for one teacher. He disagreed with me politically. When I got my report card, it was all A's and 1 F. And I knew what that was about. So I went through the steps to have it changed back again, was unhappy. So I decided while I was in college to run for the school board to get rid of this guy. And I ran and finished a good 4th. I began writing a weekly newspaper column called Power to the People, what else, in which I lambasted administration, school board, et cetera, et cetera. When I was 20, I ran again and I won. I beat a 12-year incumbent. And so all of a sudden I was getting famous in our little community. My picture was in the LA Times, and again, that feeling of being at the top of the heap when in fact I really felt like a piece of crap. In school, I was carrying 20 units a semester, commuting from there to school board meetings every week, and that's when I began to drink. I needed to drink to loosen up. I was a tight wound kid. I was the kid in high school and college who walked around with a briefcase. So that gives you a picture of what I was. I was a pretty good athlete until somebody beat me, and then I wanted to put a contract out on him. I did not handle anybody being better than me. So I began drinking once a week in college with the fraternity brothers and always got drunk. We'd have parties and people would leave their beer the night before, and I'd go around in the morning, finish their beer. After all, I was helping to pay for it. So why not drink it? I'm working 20 hours a week on top of it all at school. School board meetings became pretty tense, and so I began drinking before board meetings, and then as time went on, I began drinking during the break of school board meetings. When I was 23, for some reason, they elected me board president, and that was the year we had a big teacher strike. And all my elementary school teachers have said would picket signs with me on it. It was hard to deal with because there was such a personal connection there. And so my drinking became really profound. By the end of my term, I was not fit to run for election, and by that time the voters had had enough of me anyway. So I didn't run and quit my job and just drank. And I had picked up the use of amphetamines along the way. Combined with alcohol, the amphetamines just sent me into a tailspin. I loved what they did temporarily, but they ruined me. I used to go down to the beach in Santa Monica, a handful of black beauties, and run as fast as I could for as far as I could, and tell myself I was on a health kick. And really believed it. Really, truly believed it. I'd pass the bums under the pier and just kind of look down at them like, oh, yeah, I would never be like that. This arrogance, the arrogance that I had carried from being a kid. And that got me too. By the time I was 27, never gotten a DUI, thank you. Never gotten a DUI, never been thrown in jail, never hospitalized, never any external things. But I was physically a wreck. I weighed 130 pounds, lost all my body hair, no arm hair, nothing, distended organs over sores on my head. So I was a wreck. But the worst part was DTs every night. The worst part was how I felt. I felt completely estranged from the world. No hope, no love, no nothing, So I landed on the doorstep. I had a spiritual awakening, which I will not go into. Went to my first meeting, 26th and Broadway in Santa Monica. Sign on the back said Serenity Manor. And that struck me because I had no idea what that really meant. I knew what it meant, but I didn't know the feeling of serenity. Walked in and they just overdosed me on love. I was by far the youngest person there at the meeting, and I learned more about living in those few months I was in Santa Monica than I had ever learned before. I had learned no proper living skills before my first drink. I grew up with, my living skills were all skewed. They were designed to cope with all the various things that had happened in my life. Fear, anger, resentment. When I was drinking, I developed no living skills. It was all based on booze and pills. So when I got into AA, I was starting from ground zero. And they began to show me what to do. The first person I really related to was by her own admission. A $10 hooker on Santa Monica Boulevard. And she had been sober 5 years, and I'll just never forget it, because when she talked about what alcohol did for her and her feelings leading up to that, I knew that I was in the right place. No one had ever spoken that language to me before, and they kept telling me, keep coming back, and I did. I kept coming back. At 6 months, I moved up to Santa Barbara, where I spent the next 12 years, I think. Got very involved in AA up there. Learned more skills, got involved in my first serious relationship. Found out her son had been missing for years. We went and found him in the Army, brought him home to live with us, stayed a week. When he left, she told me she had slept with the guy, 18-year-old kid. This was all new to me, how to deal with this. So I went to my sponsor. He fortunately told me to stick with her, which was bad advice, which is why I don't give advice to sponsees or anyone for something that I haven't done myself, because that's the basis of AA. We share our own experience, strength, and hope. And got through that, learned new skills of living, finally married another girl, beautiful girl in AA. I'd been sober for years. We had 2 wonderful, beautiful children. Those were the best years of my life. We went to meetings, kids. I got to be the parent that I never had. I was with my kids all the time, playing with them, teaching them. They never had to see me drunk. My wife began drinking again. We divorced. She started telling the kids all kinds of lies about me. Courts didn't care in California. The dad was the bad guy. I was the dad. I learned later that at age 12 and 13, my kids were drinking with my ex-wife at her home. And still the courts would do nothing. So tremendous anxiety over that. You know, I took my wife to court over 100 times to try to get the judge to lean on her. Nothing. So accepting that and doing the best I could. Again, the program of AA showed me what to do along the way. On my own, I had no coping skills. I didn't know how to handle that. I would have assassinated her, you know. And by the way, I had put out a contract on my dad right before I got sober. That's how my resentment went. So got through that. I made amends to my dad, 2 years sober. He was my big amends. You know, how could I go to this guy who I hated? Made amends, we hugged, and so I felt good about myself. I felt good about being a part of AA because I did the right thing. And but later on, in the early couple 2 minutes, okay, I began to feel other things about my dad. So I found him again. He was an old man by now, and I had him come live with me. And he lived with me for 3 months, and that was such a complete cleansing and healing for me, because anything that I had left undone was completely closed by my living with him, forgiving him. He asked for my forgiveness. You know, we became pals, and I saw him in a nursing home until the time he died. A few years later, I called my kids to wish them Happy Easter on Easter Sunday. My daughter answered and she said, "Dad, Keaton, my son, died today." He had been using not meth, but I can't remember the name of the drugs now, but he OD'd on drugs. The most handsome kid I've ever seen, smart, funny, girls loved him, everything that I wasn't, that I wanted to be, and he was gone. I was in Kentucky at the time living, and the world felt like it was just closing in on me. The miracle is that not at one point did I have any desire to drink or use. That was always my go-to reaction, drink or use. I fell on the ground, I was screaming, pounding the wall. You know, I did what it took to deal with that, and I prayed a lot. So, you know, I've been through other things in sobriety, making a lot of money, going bankrupt a couple times, you know, good relationships, bad relationships. My mother died a few months ago, cut me out of the will altogether, which in her case was about $10 million. And so I had been learning to let go of that. My expectations of my mother and other people will kill me. Dr. Alcoholic Addict says, "My serenity is inversely proportional to my level of expectations. And when I expect things of other people and of my mother to give me my share of her money, you know, it fucks with me." So again, the tools of AA come in handy. Writing about it will share that too. So that's about it. You know, my life is calm today. I mean, the promises have come true for me. Halfway before I was through step 9, as they say, I began feeling everything that it talks about. The program worked for me, and I was really down and out at the end of the line alcoholic. So if you're new and can relate at all to this, all I can tell you is your case isn't any different. Chances are you really do belong here, and if you do, this program will work for you just like it worked for me. Thank you.